delighted that Tim Boatswain is with us this morning. Now, Tim, you are the president of the St Albans Civic Society, and just tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe about the St Albans Civic Society. Just let's get in the zone.
Morning, Paul. Yes, I am president of the Civic Society, which is sort of honorary post, but I did do my executive duty. I was 9 years chair of St Albans Civic Society, and the society really looks and tries to protect the environment, the built environment of St Albans. So it looks at planning applications and it makes comments on those, and it generally is concerned about how the planning takes place in St Albans and preserves the historic city.
I suppose because of the nature of St Albans, there's quite a lot to preserve, and I guess there's quite a lot of tension and pressure by people seeking to simply do things or modernise or whatever. So you're sitting in between that?
Yeah, so historic cities always have that problem, as you say. But civic societies generally throughout the country are looking at how planning is proceeding. And they have strategic aims in terms of trying to conserve and protect the built environment.
Oh, OK. Now, there's a couple of things that I think we need to talk about this morning, and the first of which is local government reorganisation. And when that's the local government here in St Albans, or any wider than that?
No, this is national government, and I did talk on my last interview about how it was proceeding, and it's a really big change. What the government wants to do is to move all authorities to being what's called unitary authorities. Now, if we take Hertfordshire, we are at the moment what's called a two-tier system. We have Herts County Council, who look after strategic things like roads, and we have a City and District Council for St Albans and the surrounding area, and they look after things like waste and recycling and so on. So it's split between the two. What the government want to do is bring it all together into one unitary authority, which they think will then save them money.
Now, I'm right in saying that because I this week received my, I call it my rates bill. It's not that anymore, is it? My, whatever it's called, the council tax bill, whatever. And I do think doesn't it differentiate between those two different authorities in terms of what you're paying for one and what you're paying for another?
That's absolutely right. And people are often surprised that 77% of what you're paying goes to the Herts County Council for the big issues, the strategic things, for example, which gets people hot under the collar, potholes and so on, whereas there's actually a very small amount that goes to the City and District Council. So there's quite a difference in balance. And we tend to, I think, generally think about the services we get, not about who provides them. So if something goes wrong, we say it's the council's fault, whatever the council is, whether it's Herts County Council or the City and District Council.
And I guess that we tend to look at that beautiful and enormous building in Hertford, and we look very jealously at that and think, well, actually, are these people sitting in that? Is that their ivory tower, as it's on the top of a hill as well?
Well, interesting enough, of course, most of the functions now of Herts County Council have moved to Stevenage. And the county hall is really for ceremonial purposes now.
I see. Well, my only memory of the of county hall is actually turning up on a double-decker bus in protesting about some housing that was being built, and there was some meeting that we had, but we arrived in a double-decker bus. But so it's the only time I've ever been to the building. So how does the Civic Society get involved in the discussions around that reorganisation?
Well, one of the things we want to do, and this is where Radio Mix is helping us a lot, is creating public awareness, because this sort of change is happening and it's going to be really major, particularly for the City and District Council here, because it will disappear. Right. And what will there be a replacement? Will we have a city council? What will actually happen when you remove the City and District Council? So what we're trying to do is make people aware, and Radio Mix is helping here, because on the 28th of April, we're going to hold a public meeting in the Cathedral, 6:30, and you can register for this when it goes up on the Cathedral website. It's not up yet because it's not until the end of the month. But what we want to do there is have a panel of local experts who can explain what's happening, but also talk about the alternatives, because one of the things that's going to happen, and it's really quite important, if we lose the City and District Council, as I say, will we have an equivalent? Will we have a town council, city council, a parish council? What will happen? And what will happen to all the assets which are now managed by the City and District Council? Verulamium Park, for example. What's going to happen? Who will manage those in the future?
It's very interesting, isn't it? Because that's that mix of being able to think about your local needs and also thinking about how you can do that efficiently and effectively. I used to work in corporate business, and I always used to use the example of the coffee machine. So you'd be working in an office and there would be a coffee machine, and there would be someone in the office who would replenish that coffee machine and it will take order coffee and things like that. And then someone would come along and they'd say, hang on a minute, look, in all these offices we've got people who are spending all their time replenishing the coffee. Well, let's centralise it. Let's create a central coffee unit. And they would then obviously create a business plan, and the business plan would say, well, we can clearly save ourselves money. And so they create this sort of monolithic coffee administration team somewhere else, and they would order the coffee. And then 2 years later, someone would say, what have we got? We have this coffee machine team over here. Why are they here? We need to push that back down. And I can see that this, with local government, it's a similar type of situation, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, the government hope that they're going to make some money, but of course initially it's going to cost quite a lot to do all the reorganisation. And what we're concerned about in St Albans is, will we have something to replace the City and District? And there is, in fact, on Monday, this evening, there is a council meeting called Strategy and Resources, and a motion has been put to them that we should look out for trying to reorganise the city into a parish council. Now, you might say that's a bit odd, but amongst the tiers of different authorities, the parish council is sort of at the bottom, but it gives some autonomy to each parish. Now, oddly enough, St Albans City Centre is unparished. It doesn't have a parish. So we'd have to become a parish council, which we could then turn into a town council, which is what's happened, for example, in Harpenden. They have a town council. We would, call it a city council, but it would have the powers of a parish council, and it could have devolved responsibility. The Unitary Authority could devolve responsibility, say, as I mentioned, Verulamium Park, for Verulamium Park and other assets that the City and District Council now have.
Tell us about the parking charges in Harpenden.
Just saying, the parking charges that have been introduced into Harpenden are very controversial. Of course, change is always difficult for people, and the changes that have happened in Harpenden, where they've lost the 1 hour free parking, has caused enormous controversy. The council say that these charges had to be brought in, and they are freeing up bays, and the charges are not so important as the opportunity to park. Whereas a lot of local people are saying, well, the retailers are saying that they're losing custom because people would park and then go and do their shopping for an hour and then go off. So they're losing custom there. Locals are saying it's a very complicated system and people are having difficulty because they have to download an app, etc., etc. So it has proved really controversial, and it's difficult to know what is true, what is going to emerge, and I think that's probably will happen with time.
So what's the rationale simply for introducing parking charges? If it's not revenue generating, then why do it?
Well, the underlying cause must be revenue generating, and we all know that local authorities are all in financial difficulties up and down the country. They've been, they would say, starved of central monies, and the delivery of services is statutory, it has to go on. For example, just think about housing and the homeless. That is a statutory obligation for councils, and that's increased. And the number of people requiring homes has increased because we haven't had much building in the last decade or 2 decades. So there's huge pressure on local authorities. And parking is one of the areas where they've introduced, not just in Harpenden but elsewhere, parking charges, and they're changing those. And it's very difficult for residents to get used to the change, and it's difficult, as I say, in Harpenden because retailers are feeling that they are losing custom. On the recent survey, some retailers said they're losing as much as 50% of footfall from prior to the charges being introduced.
Yeah, I think that the retailers, clearly have a good point, because in somewhere like Harpenden, it's a town, but it's not a huge town, and people's decisions about whether you go there to shop or go somewhere else can be very much driven by the ease with which the ease and the cost of parking in the vicinity. I should mention that I feel the last week has been quite a nightmare for me, because I came home the other day and found an envelope which contained a parking charge, and a relatively legitimate parking charge, I would say, for parking in Stevenage. My defence is not a great defence, but there we are. I didn't notice that my wife. I left all the other posts for my wife. I found there was another parking charge in a second one, and that was for another occasion where clearly, and then only yesterday a third parking charge. Now the point I want to make is that if you live in Welwyn Garden City, then there's a couple of things that have happened just very recently that people should be aware of. One is that the Waitrose car park in Welwyn Garden City has moved from being the sort of generous, the person who wanders around the car park taking note, to some super duper CCTV driven piece, which means that if you're over the time, there's no hope of the young person who's taking no charge. It's now all done by a CCTV, and indeed noticeably these CCTV parking systems are becoming much more prevalent. The result of which is that you just need to be really careful when you're going into a car park. The other thing in Welwyn Garden City is that a number of roads around the town have been added into sort of resident-only parking, when previously they were seen as a sort of the outer core where people would park in order to wander into town. And again, what I would just remind people is just check those roads, because they have changed in the last few weeks, and it's really, really important that you do that. Now, where does the Civic Society sit in relation to parking, and whether people should be given that opportunity to park for free, or whether maybe we do need to help the councils to generate some revenue?
Well, in terms of the Civic Society, I think it very wisely at the moment. It's not engaged with the parking particularly. And we're waiting to see what happens, and people will get used to the change. Whether it's helpful for Harpenden, as I say, certainly at the moment, retailers and many residents don't think it is, whereas the council think that it will actually free up spaces and make more people come to Harpenden. We'll have to see what the data says.
Yeah. I suppose it's interesting, isn't it? Because having just, as most people will have received their council tax bills in the last week, one wonders whether you'd prefer to pay more for your council tax and then park for free locally on the basis that then you are rewarding people who live locally. But maybe that's not necessarily a very clever view. But it just seems to me that might be a solution.
Well, I can only say that parking will always be controversial wherever it is.
No.
And I think you're absolutely right. People need to be very aware that changes are happening, and they need to look very carefully where they park. Otherwise, they'll get caught out.
There we are. That's the message of the morning from both Tim and I. You look and check those, check the signs, also check the road as well, because you may see that the lines may have changed. So do watch out. That's a very important thing. Now, Tim, perhaps we can move on then to the St Albans District Council budget, and having had two bombshells around government reorganisation, local government reorganisation, now parking charges, I don't know what are you going to hit me with now on the budget?
Well, Paul, of course the councils all need more money, and I'm afraid our council taxes are all going up. This is the point. What the council had a meeting a couple of weeks ago to confirm the budget. What they're trying to do is balance that budget, but it does mean they're trying to make savings of over 300,000, which is tricky to balance that. So, up and down the country, I think people are going to find their council taxes are all going up by the permitted amount.
Okay. So therefore, it's probably a good thing not to raise them in order to pay for the parking. After all, so I suppose there's a whole sort of swings and roundabouts and things that happen here, which we need to be very careful with.
Well, politically, of course, it's interesting because given what we were talking about earlier, local government reorganisation, the City and District Council will not exist by 2028. It will have disappeared and we'll have a different authority taxing us and taking our council tax.
Neat connection there with our first item this morning, Tim. Very good indeed. Tom, thank you for staying on beyond the news because we have to talk about the housing and local plan. So where are we with the housing and local plan?
Oh, right, Paul, yes. Well, the local plan, listeners will remember we've discussed it many, many times. The local plan now is at an examination stage. So it's with 2 examiners, and they wrote back to the council back in February asking for certain details. And we still don't have a date for when that public examination will take place. But the problems for housing in St Albans are enormous, and listeners may remember this. We're supposed to build 1,660 houses a year. Guess how many we built last year?
I dread to think.
384.
Wow.
So the jump is enormous, and the implications for St Albans, particularly for the Green Belt, are huge, and there are already campaigns trying to prevent parts of the Green Belt being developed. So we're going to lose some Green Belt with that enormous target. And we still don't quite know how it's all going to happen. And there are difficulties. The government is absolutely determined that there'll be 1.5 million new homes built during its term of office. However, do we have the skilled labour to do it? Do we have the raw materials? Do we have developers able to invest in this? So there's a lot of unknowns, a lot of question marks. But for St Albans, the concerns are we're going to lose a lot of Green Belt, and maybe, if you're being pessimistic, we'll suddenly become another suburb of London.
Well, actually, that's what I was going to say, because presumably when you're looking at these developments, you're looking on the outskirts of any town or city. And here we do have some connections with other smaller towns and villages, which must be quite concerning. I mean, I'm as I've mentioned, I live in Wellingham City, so I'm not going to be an expert on local geography here. But are there any particular outlying towns and villages where that you see that sort of potential for connection by development?
Well, yes. I mean, Redbourne, for example, sort of north of St Albans, there's going to be big developments there, according to the local plan, and they're concerned very much about being an independent community rather than being merged. And this is going to happen up and down the land. It is tricky. One of the issues for St Albans is the high prices that we have of our housing. The average price here is, you'll never guess the data on this, but it's 17 times the average earnings of someone who lives in St Albans. Right. So we are London prices, really, which is really difficult for people.
And I suppose the other thing is that, is there a mix of housing within St Albans that allows people to develop from being young and to families and to growing families? I mean, what is the mix of housing available at the moment?
Well, the government is requiring within these plans affordable homes, so-called affordable homes, and 40% of what is built should be affordable. However, how you classify affordable is tricky, and then again, because of St Albans and the high prices here, what will that really mean? It is a problem.
I suppose that, yes, affordability in St Albans is different to affordability in Wellingham City. And we're not that far apart as locations. And again, what do you see as the role of the civic society in looking at this? Is it in simply bringing it to people's attention?
Well, it will be, but also with each specific planning application, the society looks at it and sees if it's suitable. And if it isn't, it will object in some way or other. How effective those objections are, we'll have to see, particularly when we move from a planning department in a city and district council to one in a unitary authority, wherever that is based.
Yeah. Now, Tim, you mentioned to me earlier when you arrived that also the Civic Society is very much connected to blue plaques within St Albans. Can you tell us a little bit about what that scheme is and how it works?
Well, yes, the Blue Plaque scheme was set up with the support of Civic Society, Conservation 50, the museum, the cathedral, and so on. Very, very well represented right across the board. And the scheme itself follows the English Heritage Scheme, which is based in London. Most people know about that. Yeah. And what we try and do in the Blue Plaques is we've got plenty of nominations, amazing people, significant people who have lived in St Albans over the centuries. So we've got plenty of nominations. We try and balance those nominations so that between gender we've got male and female, inevitably, because Blue Plaques are historic. We have more men than we have women, but we try and balance that out. We follow the rules that essentially someone has to have been dead for 20 years before they're entitled to be nominated.
Okay. Right.
Well, we have some flexibility. We try to stick to that. We've now put up 14 Blue Plaques in St Albans, ranging from one in John Ball in the 14th century, one of the leaders of the Peasants' Revolt, right up to Stephen Hawking. So we've got a big range of Blue Plaques. And with the help of the Business Improvement District, the BID, we have also a Blue Plaques leaflet, a trail. So in the summer, I say in the summer because the weather hasn't been that good for walking around, but in the summer we hope lots of people will pick up the leaflet, go round the Blue Plaques, and because it's St Albans, they'll find a hostelry very near every Blue Plaque.
I think I'm beginning to like the sound of this. I think what a lovely idea. It's funny, actually, I was thinking about Desert Island Discs the other day, and that mix of, is it a politician, is it a scientist, is it someone from entertainment, someone from the arts? And it must be really tempting to sort of go for high-profile people all the time, people who are sort of well-known. But the reality is that in putting a Blue Plaque up, you're actually trying to celebrate the lives of local citizens and people who've actually contributed to society as well.
Yes, and I found it absolutely marvellous, because there's so many people I didn't know about who have done interesting things, and we've been able to put up a Blue Plaque, and I've learnt a lot more about St Albans history and the people who live here.
Well, Tim, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and let's hope that the Civic Society continues to bring some of these things to our attention and bring us more information about the locality as well. So thank you very much indeed for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Paul.